I was already running when the forest started to scream. The wind shoved needles down my throat, and the moon sat fat and watchful above the black ridge, white as a blind eye. Roots rose in the path as if to trip me on purpose. The first wail shook birds right out of the branches. The second wail bent the trunks. By the third, the puddles at my feet were rippling with the sound alone, and I knew she had found me again. I did not look back. Looking back gives a face to fear, and some faces you only meet once in a lifetime, and once is already a lifetime too long. I ran, and the forest ran with me, and beneath my skin a warmer animal woke and stretched her claws across my ribs and asked, very gently, if I would let her out. You're with whispering narratives, and if you feel your heart pounding already, hold tight. This is where the story bites. We tell the kind of tales that follow you into the hallway when you turn the lights off. If you make it to the end, you'll know why the pines in Mourning Glen never stop creaking. Breathe in, listen, close. The howl you hear might not be mine alone. I crossed the brook where the stones remember the dead, and I leapt for the far bank. Mud took me to the knee, and I pitched forward onto my hands. That was when the ground exhaled, slow and wet and grateful, and a pale knuckle rose between my fingers. A hand like the memory of a hand. I tore free, rolled, and the scream came again, longer this time, pitch climbing until the bark joined in, a choir of splitting wood, and then the voice inside me said, "Let me help you, love." And I said back, "Not yet. I'll tell it clean and in order because the forest won't. My name is Rhea Vale. I was born in a cabin my father built where the fence line kisses the first of the pines and the soil grows thin and stubborn. The world outside the trees is measured in roads and deeds, but inside the ring of Mourning Glen, a different calendar keeps time. My mother knew that calendar by heart. She taught me to braid my hair tight on the nights the moon swelled and to keep salt by the door. She said you can pray if it comforts you, but prayers are just the way our mouths try to shape a key. The lock, she said, lives in the bones. We were ordinary as people can be who sleep with their boots at the foot of the bed. My mother's laugh filled the rooms. My father's hands always smelled of sap and steel. I learned to stack wood, to fix a bent hinge, to set a snare light enough to catch a rabbit and gentle enough to release one. I learned the woods the way you learn a face, by its moods. Sometimes they leaned in to listen. Sometimes they turned their backs to you, and you got lost 4 feet from your own gate. On Sundays, we walked to the old church by the dried creek, and rang the bell not because anyone came, but because silence is a beast that eats what it can catch, and bells slow it down. When I was 16, the bell rang by itself just before dawn. We all heard it. The sound came round the hills like a river untied from its bed, and my mother went white in a way that isn't a color at all but a decision. She took my face in both her work-rough hands and said, "If you ever hear the bell with no rope and no wind, hide where your blood cannot find you." She kissed my forehead. She packed a small bag. She told my father to wait until sunset and then follow the path she was making with the weight of her steps. He did as he was told. I kept the kettle warm, like a fool, like a child. Neither of them returned. The bell hushed. Neighbors said there was a story about the first woman buried under these trees. They say she died on a night like that. Moon loud, wind mean, died with her lover's name in her mouth and a curse on her tongue for any child who would carry her sorrow forward. A banshee was the word they used, but it isn't a word from here in the woods where borrowed words badly. What the glen kept was the grief. What the glen made from it was a voice. What the glen wanted was a body. It waited. It watched me grow and tried on my shadow when I walked. When I laughed, it held its breath. When I cried, it leaned in. I lived with the absence. Some mornings the house felt full, and I would set 2 extra cups as if my mother and father were late, from the woodpile. Some nights I put my boots where they had put theirs. The forest sometimes pressed its forehead against our windows, testing the glass with slow breath. I learned the difference between simple creak and the sound of wood remembering a weight. I slept with a knife under the pillow and a prayer in my teeth like a bit. There are details that matter. The first blood that would not close, a nick on the thumb from a dull blade. The cut looked small enough to kiss away. I did kiss it. It kept weeping. Not bright, not clean, but old, like something drawn up from below. The bandage stuck and peeled and stuck again. The line of red traced the lifeline of my palm and refused every bargain I offered it. I burned the blade. I boiled the cloth. I spoke my mother's name, and then my father's, and then my own, as if the syllables could pull a hinge pin from a door no one could see. The bleeding slowed, but did not stop. A map was being drawn beneath the skin. The map led inward. So when the bell rang again, years later, with no hand upon the rope and no wind to pretend otherwise, I did not hide. I blew out the lamp. The house became a throat. The door was a set of teeth. I stepped between them barefoot, and the night took me in. You can hear the glen before you see it. The rest of the woods speak in gossip, leaves whispering about weather, owls giving you the news of the shrews. But Mourning Glen holds its tongue and keeps its counsel. The path into it is straight, for exactly as long as you keep your eyes on the horizon. The moment you look at your own feet, it curls like a question mark. I kept my eyes up and my hands open, and I told the truth under my breath. One small truth per step. My name, my home, my loss. The bell faded to a memory of metal, and then to the thought of a memory. And then there was only the soft stamping sound the deer make when they disapprove of you, but have not yet decided to leave. She announced herself. With the temperature. Cold is a word people use for lack, as if warmth were the milk and cold the empty cup. This was not lack. This was presence. The kind of cold that has a hand. The kind that knows precisely where you keep your secrets and lays upon there. My breath turned to little ghosts and back again. The hair at the back of my neck stood up like a congregation. I said my mother's name once, gently, and the name floated 4 feet and fell like a bead from a snapped string. "Daughter," said a voice. It came from the soil, from the knots in the pine, from the space between my ribs. "I have waited a long time for your wolf to grow teeth. I wanted to be brave in the way bravery is admired in stories, clean and upright and unafraid. What I managed was simpler and truer. I wanted to live, and I did not want to live alone. The animal in me, which has always been me, which is not a guest but a room of my own, pressed her muzzle into the soft of my throat from the inside. "Now?" she asked. The voice in the soil said, "Now." I nodded, and the nod broke the hinge. Heat blew through me, not fever but noon. My hands arched, my nails sang. My spine remembered a different posture and asked politely to borrow it. The first breath as more than myself steamed and tasted like iron and riverbed and a long-kept promise finally being spent. I will not lie. Becoming is a beautiful hurt. It is a hurt with purpose. Bones move like well-oiled latches. Long and exact, sinew hums. You learn how true your teeth are. You learn how much your old name covered and how much it left cold. I stepped forward, not walking anymore, but carrying the ground under me the way a ship carries the dark water it has chosen. The forest widened at my shoulders and narrowed at my intent. I could smell the time on every fallen leaf. I could hear the worms reasoning with the roots. I could count the number of sleeps between now and winters I have not met. "Daughter," the voice said again, tender as a blade. "Do you know my name?" I did not answer with a word. I answered by turning my head, by finding the seam where the ground had been lifted and laid back as if a great hand had needed to take something out and had promised to return it later. The seam was older than my mother, older than the church bell, older than the way roads forget themselves in snow. I pressed my paw into the seam, and the earth sighed like a tired aunt greeting a favorite child. The wail rose, oh it rose, and the trees tried not to bow and failed. She stood where I had pressed, tall without height, thin without hunger, all hair and mouth, and a sorrow that made my teeth ache. The Banshee, forest widow, first mother, not a ghost. Ghosts are what remain after. She was what remains before, the chapter the book tries to tear out of itself. Her eyes were moons turned inside out, bright with the dark. When she opened her mouth, the sound had my mother's tremble, and my father's stubbornness, and my own name spoken as if it belonged in a cradle and not in a throat like mine. "You were supposed to kill me," she said, not accusing, simply reporting the weather. "The night you bled, the night the map opened. It's what the Vale women do when the moon demands its accounting. Blood for silence, claw for calm. Or," I said, and my voice was honeyed with growl, "we learn to sing with you." She tilted her head. Hair spilled like roots, shaken free of a long winter, and the smell of deep places came up in a wave. "Mercy made me eternal," she said softly, almost amused. "They think we are made by violence. We are not. We are made by the refusal of it. The truth is a stone in the pocket. It makes walking heavier, but it keeps you from floating into foolish skies." I didn't come to banish her. I came for a boundary. I came for the line between what voice builds and what voice breaks, between a howl that warns and a wail that wounds. So I told her my boundary in the oldest grammar, the kind that doesn't pause for commas or flinch at verbs. I lunged. We met in the middle of a clearing the glen keeps for its arguments. My fur rose with the lightning of touch. Her hair moved like a crowd. She could not be held, and yet she held me. When her mouth opened, the sound turned the dirt to dust, and the dust to a shape that wanted to be my mother's face. When my throat opened, the sound turned the pines to pillars, and the pillars to a chapel big enough for 1,000 regrets. We fought the way water and fire fight when a roof goes up at 3 in the morning, each trying to prove the other is a different language for the same end. She shattered me into pictures. I gathered myself back into story. She screamed my past to pieces. I howled my future into a bridge. You think I'm making a metaphor of it, and perhaps I am. But listen, every time the sound burned through me, every time the world narrowed to a white wire and pulled me along it, I saw my mother kneeling where I was standing, and I watched her open her palm and let the knife fall. I watched her put her hand on the soil and ask it to take the part of her that could no longer bear what had to be borne. The soil did not argue. It has a long patience. It took, and when the bell rang, it answered the way old friends answer when you call at an hour that isn't kind. My mother didn't come back because she had gone where the voice needed her. I didn't come here to defeat her. I came to make sure the voice had a shape that did not require someone else's ending. We carry what we refuse to kill. That is the oldest rule. It can be a curse. It can be a covenant. Sometimes it is both. We broke trees. We threw each other into the moonlight and dragged each other into the dark. We made new weather. We made old weather, remember? I felt my jaw change again and again, softening when I spoke her name, sharpening when she leaned toward the thought of my throat. Her mouth widened until it could have swallowed the night, and yet the night refused to be eaten. My howl braided with her keening, and for a moment that burned like first snow on a fever, the two sounds became one, and the glen leaned in as a body, leans into a tune it knows before it knows its own bones. Then it was dawn. Dawn is not a color, it is a verdict. The wail grew tired. My legs trembled. We stood there in the thin light, two women who were not women, two mothers who had not birthed but had carried, two kinds of future pressed against the bark. "You are not my enemy," I said. "I am not anything without you," she answered, and that was almost worse. "Then let us make a rule," I said, and I set it down like a trap with the teeth turned outward. "When the bell rings with no hand on the rope, you will sing no louder than what the living can bear. I will answer with a howl that keeps them to their path. We will scare, and we will warn. We will not devour until the moon grows ill-tempered," she said, a flicker of a smile tearing the sadness into something almost shapely. "Until then," I said, and we both understood the smallness of vows made in a world that enjoys breaking things for sport. She stepped nearer. The cold she carried set the dew to diamond. She put her forehead to mine, and we exchanged the only blessing that matters in a place like this. I allowed her sorrow to pass through my ribs without lodging there. She allowed my hunger to pass through her mouth without taking root. When she sighed, the frost lifted from the ferns. When I breathed, the birds remembered their wings. She loosened into ash, into gleam, into a scatter of notes too thin for ears but not for pines. They took her in. The glen does not waste. I walked home on feet that remembered the shape of the paw and did not feel ashamed about it. My door was ajar in the way doors are after the night has been inside and has put everything back where it found it, almost, kettle included. I set it right on the hook, and I set 2 cups and then a third. I poured into the third and let the steam rise, and I told the room out loud what the rule was now. Houses, like forests, behave better when they are included in the minutes. Days afterward, the villagers spoke of a change. The bell still rang one night with no wind. Every dog in the valley stood and listened, but did not cry. A hunter lost his way and walked straight to the edge of the glen, and then stopped, not by will, but by throat, as if a hand circled his voice and reminded him gently about kindness. He went home by a longer path and thanked no one. A child wandered toward the wrong shadows and heard a sound that should have frozen the marrow, and yet it sounded like a warning sung by someone who knew her name. She avoided the thorns. She was seen coming out the other side with her dress unblooded, her pockets full of acorns, and a story that did not need correcting. Do not think peace is permanent. The moon has moods, and so do we. Some nights I wake with the taste of iron, and the litany of names I could have been if someone else had dropped the knife. Some nights the Banshee gathers herself into a denser grief, and I feel her whittling the air thinner until I choke on what was never mine. On those nights I go to the clearing, and we practice the rule like a vow renewed. We lift our voices and let the first note crack and the second mend and the third learn how to carry weight without breaking. We frighten the foxes. We do not apologize. Then we sit with our backs to opposite trees and tell the darkness what we have learned about promises that outlive the promisers. I have learned the shape of mercy. It is not soft. It is not a white flag. It is a set of teeth you choose not to use. I have learned the appetite of grief. It wants a body to wear to the dance. If you do not volunteer, it will take measurements anyway. I have learned the worth of a bell rung not to summon, but to warn. I have learned that every woman in my line had a knife and a choice, and that neither was clean. I have learned that when I love someone I am loud about it, louder than an animal, louder than a curse, louder than the night. If you are loved by me, you will hear it at 2 in the morning when you think no one can. People ask about the wolf and the woman. They want a taxonomy, a chart, a Latin name pinned cleanly to the cork. I can only say this: I am whole. The wolf is not an other. She is the room in the house with the best light. When I stand in her doorway, my shoulders drop. When I borrow her jaw, my words do not fail me. When she sleeps, I keep watch. When I sleep, she counts the windows and tests the latch. We do not fear each other. We do not ask each other to be smaller than our hunger or kinder than our truth. We take turns holding the knife, and we take turns setting it down. Do not come to Mourning Glen to prove anything. The woods dislike bravado. Bring bread. Bring a name that is yours to spend. Bring a story you would be willing to carry on your back when your legs are tired and your tongue is thick. If the bell rings and there is no rope and you are far from your own door, stop where you are. Touch a tree as if it were someone's shoulder, because it is. Say, "This is where I end and begin." Say, "This is what I will not eat, and this is what I will sing for." If the wail comes, bow your head as if a mother were passing. If the howl comes, lift your chin as if a sister were calling. Do not run unless the path itself starts to move. If it does, trust it. It knows the old roads. One night, deep winter, the sky clear as a lie, I found a child's ribbon stiff with frost tied to the church bell's rope. No footprints in the snow, none but mine. I warmed the ribbon in my hands until the color remembered itself. It was red like a fresh oath. I tied it to my wrist. I said softly, "The way you speak to embers. I will carry this for you until you are brave enough to carry it yourself." The bell made a sound like a vowel, learning to walk. In the glen, something shifted from a cry to a breath. I went home and set 3 cups, and the third had steam that curled into the shape of a little hand before it turned to regular air. The world will tell you the forest is dangerous. The world is correct, but it will leave out the more useful danger, which is that you might be welcomed. It will not warn you how hard it is to decline hospitality from a place that has already made room for your chair. The glen has a chair for me now. It stains my clothes with resin and writes my name in sap across my shoulder blade when I lean too long against a trunk and fall asleep. I dream of a woman whose hair is a net for stars, and she combs my fur with a rib bone and hums the tune that keeps the weather from misbehaving. When I wake, the weather has obeyed, and for a while even the owls open their eyes wider, impressed with our small governance. When the next full moon swelled, I did not bar the door. I lit a candle and set it on the porch rail and sat with my feet on the step, where my father had taught me to lace my boots in a way that would not come undone if I had to run. The Banshee came as mist comes across a field, ankle high and then waist and then shoulder. She sat beside me close enough that the candle's little heat could do her a little good. We watched the trees make their long shadows and listened to a fox alphabetize its complaints and then forget the order halfway through. We did not speak much. Friends don't have to. "Will you keep singing after I go?" she asked at last. Her voice did not rattle the nails. It was as tired as a good horse. "I will sing until someone better at mercy teaches me another song," I said. "Better at mercy," she repeated, amused to her own surprise. "Is there such a thing?" "There. Had better be," I said. "Else what are we practicing for?" She nodded, and when she smiled, this time it did not tear her sadness. It let it rest. She set her hand over mine. Cold met heat. For a breath that felt like the beginning of a season, we were the same woman at 2 different times. Both of us carrying the knife, and neither of us needing to lift it. The moon watched like a grandmother who has learned to trust the young. Somewhere, the bell considered ringing and decided the quiet had finally earned itself. If you ever come to this valley, and the road leads you wrong and you find yourself at the fence line where my father's hands once measured what could be measured, stop and call my name. Do not be polite. The woods dislike false modesty. Call like you mean to be heard. I will come. If I come on 4 legs, do not be startled, and if I come with another voice braided through mine, do not be afraid. We sang a rule here. It is not perfect. It keeps the children's feet out of the thorns, and it turns the hunters home before they find what any man would regret finding. It gives the sorrow a mouth that does not devour. It gives the hunger a jaw that does not lie. And when the story's last step comes, and it always comes, and it will come for you and for me and for every bright-eyed soul who thinks they've made a bargain the night cannot count, remember this: the forest does not echo. It answers. If you call in cruelty, it will carry that call back to you 3-fold, and you will not love the sound it makes wearing your coat. But if you call in protection, in humility, in a promise not to cause pain that cannot be paid for, the glen will set a cup on the table and wait for you to sit. I was running when the forest started to scream. I am walking now. The moon is smaller than it was. Dawn is a verdict, and I have learned how to appeal. The Banshee moves through the pines like a memory learning to forgive itself. The wolf and I share a house, and it is not always tidy, but it is ours. If you're still listening, if your chest is tight and your windows feel closer than they were when we began, step lightly when you go to bed. Some doors need you to keep them honest. Some debts are paid in courage, some are paid in the voice you use when you promise to come back. If you want the next part, if you want to learn the words we use to tune the wail and the howl so they would not break the valley, then step across the threshold of this night and meet me on the far side. Because the forest never truly ends. It just folds itself around the listener until they belong to its silence. And if you've heard the howl this long, you're already part of its echo. The next ritual is already waiting on your screen. And when you arrive there, remember the name that called you here. This is Whispering Narratives. We don't just tell stories. We keep the dark company. Subscribe before the next full moon and share this tale with the one friend you'd save at any cost. Some debts are paid in courage, some are paid in clicks. Yours pay both.